Let's look at how we are going to derive a rule from a given table of values. The first thing to work out what the rule is to look for the patterns in the x values and then look for the patterns in the y values. So let's start with the x values. Now when I go across on these numbers, you look at what they increase by. Now you'll notice in this case that as I go up, I get an increase of positive 2 on each set of numbers. Then when we look at the pattern in the y's, there is a pattern, but this time the pattern is there is an increase of +1 in each of them. Now because there happens to be a pattern in x's and there happens to be a pattern in the y's, that tells us straight away that we are dealing with a linear equation. And if you remember in our previous videos, a linear equation is an equation that when graphed will be a straight line. Now these changes that are occurring in the x's and the changes that are occurring in the y are going to actually help us to work out our equation. First of all, when we write a linear equation, we're looking at an equation that's in the form of y equals mx plus b. Don't be too concerned about what this means. It's just that the equation will look like y equals, like 2x plus 5, or y equals 3x, or y equals x plus 6, things that you're used to seeing. But first of all, we're going to be looking at how to get this value in front of the x. Now this value is found by looking at the changes of the y over the changes of the x. So in other words, we've got to look at, so to work out m, let's go back a minute, to work out m, I need to work out what the changes of y are over the changes of our x. Now in this case, our y changes are 1 and our x changes are a half. So when I go to start completing my table of values, in the m place I actually write a half. Then I need to work out my b. Now in the case of b, all we need to do is look at our table of values and find where x equals 0. Now in this case, you can see that x equals 0 here, and notice its value is a 2. So all I have to do is add a 2 to the end. So my formula or my rule for this given table of values is y equals half x, whoops, I forgot to put the x in, plus 2. So it started off looking complicated, but in actual fact is very easy. And the formula itself looks complicated, but it is easy to write. So in other words, we have to halve the x value and then add 2 every single time. So test it. Half of, if I was to look at 2, half of 2 is 1. When I add 2, I get 3. If I look at the number 4, if I half 4, I get 2. When I add 2, I get 4. Again, look at my formula. When I half 6, I get 3. 3 plus 2 equals 5. So I know that I've got the right formula or the right rule for this table of values. Let's have a look at example 2. Now again, this is another table of values. It just happens to be in a vertical form. Makes no difference. We're still looking at the changes in the x and the changes in the y to help us work out what the rule is. So in other words, we're trying to work out the relationship between the x's and the y's. So once again, let's start with the x, and we're looking for the difference between each x as it goes along, and hopefully it's the same. So in this case we can see that we are increasing by 1, we're increasing by 1 again, we're increasing by 1 again, and the increase by 1 again. Now let's look at our y's, and in our y's we are increasing by 1. So this one looks like it's going to be a nice simple rule. Again, the rule that we're trying to work out is something that looks like y equals mx plus b. again, don't worry too much about what the M is and what the B is. That's actually information you'll learn more in the next topic, or in Year 9. Now, to work out the M, or to work out what number needs to go into M, remember I need to look at the change of the Y over the X. So the Y is 1 and the X is 1. Now 1 divided 1 equals 1. So when I go to work out my equation, I start with Y equals 1X. Now the B is always found at the 0 mark. So wherever my 0 is, happens to be what my B is going to be. Because if B represents, or the letter for B actually means where does it cross the y-axis, or what does it do when x equals 0. And in this case, when x equals 0, it gives me a value of 5. Now remember, 1x can be written also as x, so we get x plus 5. Let's have a look at our third example. So once again, let's repeat the process. We're looking for the pattern or the rule in the x's, and in this case it is going up by 1. And then we're looking for the rule, looking for the change that is occurring in the y. And in this case, it's actually going down by -2. So there can be negatives that are involved. So once again, we're looking at trying to find a rule that looks like y equals mx plus b. First of all, remember what we said last time. This m value is found by the y over the x. So the change that occurs in the y over the change that occurs in the x. And in this case, the change in the y is -2 over the change in the x is +1. Now I said to you previously that the b is always the value when x equals 0. But when I look at my table of values, there's no x equals 0 in there. However, there's no reason why we can't, make that up ourselves, because we know the change. We know that if my x becomes a 1, because it went down 1, then this has to go up 1. So in other words, when x equals 1, my y is going to be equal to 1. And then if I do when x equals 0, then my y has to be 2 more as well, so my x is going to be equal to 3. Just double check it, go the other way. Okay, remember, look at the change. The change is a +1, and then of course the change from the 1 to the 2 is also a +1. Double check. Has it gone down by 2? 3 to 1 is a -2. Has it gone down by 2 again? Yes, 1 to -1 goes down by -2. So if you're never sure, just go back and always recheck. So in this case, when 0 equals 1, when x equals 0, my y equals 3, or in this case my b equals 3. Rub that out, sorry. And my b equals 3. Now, our equation is a little bit untidy. We know that we don't need 1 underneath of a fraction, so I get y equals 2x plus 3. And again, remember what that equation means. It means that for every x value, we have to times every x value by -2 first, and then add 3 to get my y value. Also, just a quick revision, look at my table of values. Notice that the change in the x's is constant, the change in the y is also constant, meaning it must be a linear equation, because when the change is constant in the x and the change is constant in the y's, you always get a straight line if you were to graph it onto a number plane.